welcome to the headline interview with me, Anthony Baxter. My guest today is the campaigner Peter Tatchell, perhaps best known for his role in the fight against discrimination towards the LGBT community. He remains one of the most high-profile human rights activists and is now the director of the campaign group, the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Welcome, thank you for joining us today. We will get to some of your ideas for the capital, because I know you have lots of them, but first I want to go back to the start. And I think I'm right in saying you were about 15 when you first started to campaign, is that right?
That's right, in my hometown of Melbourne, Australia. At the time there was the death penalty, and a prisoner who'd escaped from jail was on trial allegedly for shooting dead a prison warder during his escape. I worked out at the age of 15 he probably could not have fired the fatal bullet, given the trajectory of the bullet through the warder's body. Nevertheless, he was hanged, and that to me provoked a lifetime of scepticism towards authority. I thought to myself, if the government, the police, the courts can hang this man when there's surely a reasonable doubt that he fired the fatal bullet, then I can't trust them. And that led me to question lots of other things. The mistreatment of the Aboriginal people in Australia, Australia's involvement in the war in Vietnam alongside the Americans, and eventually, of course, the persecution of gay people.
And around 1970, you left Australia and you came to live here in London. Where did your campaigning roots take up hold here?
Well, of course, when I left Australia, when I left Melbourne, there were no gay rights organisations, not even any counselling services or support groups. There was absolutely nothing. So when I arrived in London, the Gay Liberation Front had not been long established, and that was to me a great, exciting new opportunity to campaign for my own human rights as a gay man. And I think within 5 days of arriving in London, I was at my first meeting, and within a month I was helping to organise some of the big, spectacular Gay Liberation Front protests. Yeah,
let's just talk about some of the Festival of Light might be one that people kind of would remember. This was a stage where you kind of entered really and kind of took over that event. Just talk us through what happened there, because I think people who won't know about it might be quite surprised at the process that went on there.
The Festival of Light was organised by people like Mary Whitehouse, Malcolm Muggeridge and Cliff Richard. It was a campaign against what they called the permissive society, and one of the issues they were focusing on was homosexuality. They wanted to clamp down. They didn't think that gay people were entitled to equal rights. So we organised an alternative, which was what we called Operation Rupert, named after Rupert Bear, I think it was in IT magazine, where we forged tickets to their big mass rally in Westminster Central Hall, and at various points during the proceedings disrupted it. So, for example, when Cliff Richard spoke, we unfurled a gigantic banner from the balcony saying "Cliff for Queen." When Malcolm Muggeridge spoke and said he didn't like homosexuals, lots of the people from the Gay Liberation Front who were dressed as nuns got up in their seats and started singing and dancing and releasing mice into the audience, which of course created chaos. I was in the youth group in the balcony, and at the time when Malcolm Muggeridge made his statement, several of us got up and kissed to show that same-sex love was here, it was a reality, and should be accepted. So we sort of took over the whole event, and I think presented a more liberal, tolerant, inclusive alternative.
I think lots of people now it would seem quite funny to some extent, farcical, which was the aim. But back then in the 70s, we were a long way away from where we are now. I imagine the press reacted in a way which was not in favour of what you'd done.
The press and public reaction was quite mixed. Yes, there was some condemnation, but because we did it with humour, a lot of the critics were won over. And so I think a lot of people, saw it as harmless. Yes, disruptive, that's true, but not in an aggressive or malicious way.
And LGBT is what perhaps people might know, and fighting for rights there, but you focus on lots of other things as well. Robert Mugabe, for example, you have got yourself in situations involving him, and that's to some extent against other kind of issues which you felt strongly about.
Yeah, throughout all of my 48 years of human rights campaigning, I've been focused not just on LGBT rights, but also on broader human rights. So when myself and colleagues from the LGBT group Outrage attempted a citizen's arrest of Robert Mugabe here in London. We ambushed his motorcade in central London and put him under arrest. It wasn't because of his homophobia, although he is very homophobic. It was because of his torture of his own citizens. So we were using international law to try and bring him to justice, and using our power of citizen's arrest to get him arrested and taken to the police. The sad reality is that when we did that, that was successful. We had him under arrest in the street near Victoria Station, but the police completely ignored all the legal papers to show that he was complicit in torture, contrary to Britain's Anti-Torture Act and to international human rights statutes. We were arrested, and he was given a police escort to go Christmas shopping in Harrods.
You mentioned Outrage, and that was the group which you kind of formed out of the Gay Liberation Front.
Well, it was actually quite a number of years later, but it wasn't just me, it was me and many other people. There's about 30 of us who collectively founded Outrage in 1990.
And does that group still kind of operate today and still work now, or have you kind of moved towards the Peter Tatchell Foundation, as it were?
Outrage sort of continues to chug along, but not with the high profile that it once had.
Okay. And in terms of your personal safety, you mentioned some of the arrests, around 3,000 acts of protests or civil disobedience. You've put your life in danger several times. Why have you taken it to that extreme, as it were?
Well, of course, it's never been a conscious desire to put myself at risk.
No.
But I think sometimes to challenge injustice, you have to go a bit beyond the normal way of doing things. And so the second attempted citizen's arrest of Robert Mugabe, which took place in Brussels in 2001, did result in me being beaten unconscious by his bodyguards and has left me with some minor brain and eye injuries.
Yeah,
now, I didn't choose that. I didn't want that.
Yeah.
But it actually was a very effective protest because people saw those TV images and thought to themselves, if Robert Mugabe is prepared to have his goons beat up a peaceful protester in broad daylight in the heart of a European capital city in front of the world's media, just imagine what he's doing to his own people when no one's watching. So it was a very effective, dramatic, but unintended way of highlighting the abuses of the Mugabe regime.
And you also faced a similar incident where you were beaten badly in Moscow, is that right?
That's right. I went there to support the very brave, heroic Russian campaigners who were attempting, in accordance with the Russian constitution, to hold a gay pride parade. You know, freedom of expression and the right to protest is guaranteed under the Russian constitution. But the then mayor of Moscow banned the parade, and the activists there asked me to go there to support them, and I did, and we were all arrested. But before I was arrested, I was very badly beaten by neo-Nazis who the Moscow city police allowed to attack me. They actually stood back and stood there with folded arms while I was being beaten, almost unconscious. When I was losing consciousness on the ground, they stepped in to arrest me, and the attackers were allowed to walk free. Later on, when I was in the police van, I actually saw one of the attackers walk up to the police lines and show some kind of ID and walk through the police lines, suggesting that that person and possibly his colleagues were actually undercover police officers masquerading as neo-Nazis.
Just some of those incidents that you've talked about there just sets out how far you're prepared to go to fight for what you believe in. I think it's fair to say you're a radical in that way. There are few people who would take it as far as you do. What is it that drives you in that respect?
Well, I love other people. You know, I love justice, freedom, equality. I don't like to see other people suffering. When I see other people being subjected to injustice, I think that could be me. So I feel a moral duty to try and do something to help them, to publicize what's happened to them, to stand against their oppressors. And yeah, I agree it's a risky thing. You know, because of the brain and eye injuries, I've had to have an implant in my right eye. I still suffer from the long-term effects of the severe concussion, memory loss and damage, problems with coordination and concentration, balance. You know, these are all classic symptoms of when you get badly beaten and knocked unconscious. But by comparison to human rights defenders in many other countries, I think I've got off lightly. If I was in Russia or Iran or Saudi Arabia, somewhere like that, I'd probably be in prison, be tortured, and possibly even killed. So in that respect, I think, what I've done is actually not that great. I mean, maybe in terms of British politics, it's a bit of risk-taking beyond the norm, but in terms of what global human rights defenders endure, I think it's been very modest and very small scale, really.
OK, Peter, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, though, we'll have plenty more on today's headline interview, including some of Peter's ideas for the capital.
Air quality in London is appallingly low. We're violating European Union standards. It's damaging the health, particularly of elderly people and young kids. That is not acceptable.
Hello there, welcome back to the headline interview with me, Anthony Baxter. My guest today is the campaigner Peter Tatchell. Now, before the break, we kind of looked at a very quick history of some of the things that you've been involved in from when you were 15 until now. What we didn't touch on was your political attempts, say, as it were. So in 1983, the Bermondsey by-election, you decided to run for that. It wasn't a success, and actually, I quote, it's been described, I think, by you as kind of one of the dirtiest campaigns in history, as it were. What is it that makes you feel like it was like that?
I think the general consensus from most observers was that the scale of violence during that campaign was almost unprecedented. I was physically attacked over 150 times during the campaign. I had over 30 death threats and more than a dozen violent attacks upon my home, including bricks to the window. That's pretty unusual in election campaigns. And it was very, very scary. I was literally living in fear of my life during that campaign. And I did not win that seat. I should have, but I didn't. And that was partly also, of course, because of the way in which a lot of the tabloid newspapers did a non-stop drip, drip, drip effect almost every day of negative, hostile stories. They weren't interested in my vision. Now, I had two great ideas for that constituency. The first was to defend the local working class community against the invasion of property speculators who wanted to carve up the riverside for luxury flats and office blocks. So I was dead against that. I said that this was going to be the decimation of the local community, that local people would be squeezed out. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened over the preceding years. The other big vision I had was to transform Bermondsey into a garden city, to use it as a model for inner city regeneration, to green the whole area, to make it a more people-friendly, environmentally friendly region or space, to act as a model for the rest of London. Sadly, I never got to fulfill those ideas, but I think that vision is still an important one, not just for Southwark and Bermondsey, but also for the whole of London.
And the Garden City idea is one that you're still passionate about. It's one of your ideas. You want to see 1 million new trees planted in the city. Just talk us through this idea.
Well, we all know that the air quality in London is appallingly low. We're violating European Union standards. It's damaging the health, particularly of elderly people and young kids. That is not acceptable. Now, if we could plant 1 million new trees, that would not only soak up some of that pollution, it would also soak up carbon dioxide and therefore contribute to tackling global warming. And it would also beautify the city. It would make the city a more beautiful place. All the research shows that people who live in cities with lots of trees and parkland are much happier, more content, more fulfilled. They enjoy their living space much more. So it's an obvious idea. And one sort of side issue I proposed was the idea of trees for life. That in addition, perhaps the GLA could fund the selling at perhaps a token price of £1 of fruit trees to Londoners to plant in their own gardens so that London could become more food self-sufficient. It's a simple idea, relatively low cost. I don't know why any politician hasn't taken it up.
Yeah, it seems to make sense on that basis, and I think there'd be very few people who would argue against having more trees. One which I can imagine would perhaps cause more controversy is the idea of digging up the Mall and turning it into an ice rink. I can imagine some people saying, well, actually, we wouldn't want that. But just talk us through that idea.
Well, the Mall, which stretches from Buckingham Palace to Trafalgar Square, is one of the great grand thoroughfares of London. But it's taken over by cars. It's ugly. What I would do is I'd dig it up and create a shallow pool from the ICA to Buckingham Palace, or near to Buckingham Palace, to create a reflective pool, similar to the one by the Washington Monument in the United States or by the Taj Mahal in India. It would be a beautification of that ugly street and give it a real grandeur and vision and beauty. But in winter, I'd freeze it over to create the world's biggest public ice rink. You know, a publicly accessible ice rink in the heart of London on a huge scale, not only a beautiful sight to behold, but also a fantastic community amenity.
It would certainly be a tourist attraction, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
You would bring a lot of people there to look at that.
Yeah.
Do you think it would ever be a reality?
Again, the cost is not huge. We just have to get away from this idea that the Mall is for cars. It's not. It should be for people and the beautification of London.
Okay, talk me through the Embankment Sculpture Garden. Now, this is the north side of the river at the moment, which, in your words, I think is void of any kind of beauty or arts installation. Is that right?
That's right. The whole of the Victoria Embankment is a car zone. This precious real estate on the bank of the Thames is given over to cars. What I would do is close Victoria Embankment to cars from Westminster Bridge to Waterloo Bridge, and possibly put the cars underground in a tunnel, but whatever, grass over that whole area that's currently roadway to create a beautiful riverside parkland with cafes and maybe art exhibitions. But my big idea is what I've called the Embankment Sculpture Garden. So in that swathe of grassland on the river, you'd have maybe a rotating exhibition of perhaps about 200 contemporary sculptures, which again would be a fantastic amenity, a real cultural feast for Londoners, and a huge tourist attraction as well. Again, I can't understand why no politician can see that wasting the Victoria Embankment with cars is not a sensible way to use that riverside frontage.
Are you anti-car?
Cars have their place, but I don't think they should dominate the city. That's why I also want to see what I've called car-free Sundays in the West End. You know, again, the West End, the fumes from the traffic are killing people. They make it an unpleasant environment. There's congestion with traffic. There's traffic accidents. People have to dodge in and out between cars. For a trial period of 3 months, and possibly open to renewal if people enjoyed it, I would say that the whole of the West End should be car-free on Sundays for a start. And we should see how it goes. Not only would that reclaim the streets for pedestrians and, you know, reclaim all those cultural and commercial places for visitation rather than, you know, dodging in between the traffic. But of course, those vast pedestrianised streets like Regent Street, Oxford Street, they could be in part given over to open-air concerts, art exhibitions, outdoor street cafes. You know, again, the potential is so fantastic, and we're not using it because we're allowing the car to dictate to London. And, you know, I'm pretty certain that after the 3-month trial period, most people would want to continue it and make it permanent.
And within this plan, this car-free Sunday, would public transport be allowed so that people can get around still? Would we have buses and taxis in this area, or
no taxis, but perhaps a limited bus service, so that people with mobility problems would be able to get around.
Okay.
But I think we have to make it clear that the streets are safe for people, they're less polluted, and we give over those spaces to other things that Londoners can enjoy.
Something else you think is underused is the Thames, and you'd actually like it to be considered the 14th tube line. There are plenty of boats on there at the moment. It seems to work already. Why do we need to improve that?
Well, first of all, our roads are congested, the underground is congested, we need to relieve it. And the Thames is the great London superhighway. It is massively underused. There are a constellation of private boat operators, but there's no coordinated system. What I'm proposing is to make the River Thames the 14th tube line, to integrate river bus services using hydrofoil and hovercraft between Hammersmith in the west and Greenwich in the east. with only about 8 stops in between, all linked to tube stations. So the whole system would be integrated into the mainstream London transport network, and it would be Oyster card accessible. That way, if these services ran every 5 to 10 minutes all throughout the day, you'd very soon start to get people off the roads and off the underground, off the buses, onto this faster, more efficient way of moving people around the capital. Again, it's an easy peasy idea. We just need to have the will to make it happen.
Surely your position then, if you were to stand for Assembly, you would be in the right place to try and make some of these ideas actually happen.
Yeah, but I'm not too sure that me alone as an Assembly member would be able to do that. And of course, I have already been lobbying. These are all ideas from my election campaign in 2000. And one of the other ones was the idea of cycle superhighways. And at last, after a bit of lobbying to Transport for London, that's becoming a reality. It's not entirely the scheme that I envisaged, but it's moving in the right direction.
You're obviously passionate about London. London is obviously a city which you love and you want to see improved. These obviously ideas here would do that in your view. This is the way that you'd like to see London in the future.
Absolutely. We've got to have politicians with vision. Now, the Garden Bridge is a great new vision. We need more ideas like that. And I just find it so sad that politicians have such low horizons. This is one of the greatest cities in the world. I just love living here, but I can see so many ways in which it could be made better. And I'm sure there are people with sharper minds than mine that can come up with even better ideas. I say, let 100 flowers bloom.
OK, Peter, we're going to take another short break. Plenty more to come on today's headline interview with Peter Tatchell. Hello there, welcome back to the headline interview with me, Anthony Baxter. Today my guest is the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. We've kind of seen a few of your ideas there in terms of politics, what you would do if, for example, you were an Assembly member. What do you make of the current electoral system? Because I know that in the past you've been quite outspoken about the fact that first past the post doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, the sad fact is Britain does not have a fully democratic electoral system. We don't have a parliament that represents the full spectrum of public opinion. And that's because we have a first-past-the-post system which worked well when there were only 2 major parties, but doesn't work in a multi-party system. So millions of people will vote for smaller parties and get no MPs or few MPs. That cannot be right. When you think about it, from 1955 to 2005, not a single British government won a majority of the popular vote. Every single government was a minority one, including Margaret Thatcher's landslide of 1983 and Tony Blair's landslide of 1997. Both prime ministers, as were, came to power on less than 45% of the vote. Now, that is not fair, it's not democratic. So we've got to change the electoral system to make it fairer and more representative. And that's also a way to help reinvigorate people's confidence in politics. One of the reasons why some people feel so alienated is because they think, my vote doesn't count. And as we all know, that in most elections, the outcome hinges on the votes of about 15 to 30,000 people in key marginals. The rest of us don't count. That cannot be right. And I think the Scottish system, the Scottish Parliament system, and the London Assembly system are far superior. In London, people vote for a constituency member, and they also vote for a list. So that means that people who vote for minority parties with reasonable support get representation. That's why we've had 2 Greens on the London Assembly for many, many years, because people do. There's a sizable proportion of the population who do support the Greens. And I've got to say that those 2 Green members, Darren Johnson and Jenny Jones, have punched way above their weight. They've been very instrumental in initiating lots of positive changes for Londoners. And I'd like to see more minority parties represented.
It's probably key to point out you are a member of the Green Party, and that's
indeed.
Probably why you're supporting those two members there.
But there are other members. I'd like to see other members representing other minority parties as well, because I think it's important. Even if I disagree with them, it's important that the full spectrum of public opinion is represented in our elected bodies.
The public were given their say on alternative vote in 2011, and they voted overwhelmingly in favour of keeping it as it is. Why did that happen?
Well, because it wasn't a genuinely proportional system. The alternative vote is just a slight modification of first past the post. It would have kept people supporting minority parties out of representation, just like the current system.
So that was a wasted referendum in your view?
Yes, and I'm very angry with Nick Clegg for agreeing to that, stitch-up. Basically, the Tories put that proposal forward knowing that it wasn't genuinely going to solve the issue, and they knew people would probably vote against it.
When it comes to the economy, you've also got strong views on the fact that actually it's not right at the moment, and we've obviously just come out of what was a very difficult time. You feel like we need more transparency in the economic system?
Absolutely. We all expect political democracy. Why not economic democracy as well? Under the economic system, we are living under an economic dictatorship. A handful of very rich, powerful people, major shareholders, directors and managers, have all the economic power. They make all the fundamental decisions, both in public and in private business. And that cannot be right. To me, it's really important that people at the grassroots have a say in how the economy is run, that they're involved in decision making. So I'd like to see, for example, all public and private institutions with more than 50 employees to be required by law to have at least 1/3 employee and consumer representatives on their boards, with full access to corporate information and full decision-making and voting rights. That would be a way of making the economy more of a partnership, bringing people into the process of decision-making, giving them a stake. And I think, as we see with the German Works Council system, on the whole, it leads to better industrial relations, improved productivity, and a fairer deal for employers and consumers.
Do you think, actually, the state of our economy now, because we are booming again, actually what's happened, we've taken the right path because we have come out of a recession and we are actually working well again? Is that not a positive?
Well, that's a separate issue. This is a big issue. This is how we run the economy. It's not based on the ebbs and flows of economic success or failure. This is based upon the democratic principle that if we believe in democracy, it shouldn't just be political democracy, it should also be economic democracy. Another idea, of course, is to give employees control of their pension funds, to enable a system whereby employees can control their pensions. So instead of hiving them off to corporate interests, employees through a mutual society would hire financial experts who would run their pension fund according to the parameters decided by the members. That would give a huge, huge stake to employees. Currently, pension funds hold about 1/3 of the entire stock market. That's a huge counterweight to private profit and big business. And I think, again, as a way of ensuring that investment is more attuned to people's needs, because if you're in a pension fund and you've got control over it, obviously you want to maximize returns, but you're also thinking about the consequences for your family, your local community, your region, and that I think would produce more socially and environmentally aware decisions from people. Another idea, of course, is to give employees a share of the profits made by companies. So at the moment, if an employee, does something, devises some new system of production or new mode of operation which improves efficiency, the people who get the benefits are the directors and the shareholders. I'm saying the employees should benefit as well. And the bonuses shouldn't just be for bankers, they should be for anybody in a public or a private institution that comes up with ideas that can help improve efficiency and make savings while also maintaining quality of service. These are, to me, very basic, obvious, fundamental ideas. We need economic democracy. We need to ensure that the economic system is in closer alignment with the political system.
Okay, let's just move on to your foundation, the Peter Tatchell Foundation. I think a lot of people will have heard of you, but what does the foundation do? What's its aims?
Well, it was set up about 4 years ago by a group of friends who wanted to give some organisational, institutional structure to the work I do and to help get some decent funding. Basically, the foundation its remit is to work for human rights. So about 50% of our work is focused on LGBT human rights and about 50% on non-LGBT issues, broader human rights in countries like Russia, Pakistan, Uganda, Saudi Arabia and West Papua. Our goal is to help support, publicise and empower human rights defenders in those countries, as well as working with a different range of organisations in this country to improve human rights here. We are a very, very small NGO, but I think we punch above our weight. We've helped champion the cause of same-sex marriage in this country, which was finally won after many decades of struggle. We've also currently pushing for better sex and relationship education in schools and for stronger action against all forms of bullying, not just homophobic bullying, but also racist and misogynistic bullying as well.
And in terms of the campaign work, the activism that you did in the past, the zaps as they're called, those kind of outrageous moments, is that how you still see the foundation working, or actually do you work in a different way now?
Well, I've always worked both inside the system and outside it. So at the height when I did outrageous things like trying to arrest President Mugabe or going into the pulpit of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, or ambushing Tony Blair's motorcade in Piccadilly in protest at the Iraq War. At the same time I was doing that, I was also lobbying government with concrete practical proposals to address hate crimes, to remedy hate crimes for everyone in the capital, to ensure non-discrimination. So way back in the Bermondsey by-election, my big idea, my big controversial idea, or one of them, was to legislate to guarantee equal rights and protection against discrimination for every person in this country, for every person. And it took until 2010 with the Equality Act for it to happen. But, that's the kind of thing I was doing by lobbying members of Parliament, lobbying government ministers for years and years and years. So I do a bit of both. And that sort of makes me a bit hard for some people to deal with, because they're used to either dealing with people who work inside the system or those who work outside it, not people who do both. But I think there's a role for both, and I think at the end of the day, all the great social struggles throughout history have been based upon direct action. The suffragettes, before them the Chartists, the Black Civil Rights Movement in America, the huge mass protests against the poll tax. These were all examples where direct action got a result when lobbying had failed.
Okay, well, when we come back after the break, I'm going to find out more about your inspirations. I think you've touched on them there. Time for another short break. When we come back, plenty more from Peter Tatchell. Hello there, welcome back to the Headline Interview. Today my guest is Peter Tatchell. Just before the break, you mentioned 1998. That was the Easter Sunday service. And of all the years, 48 years, you actually ended with one conviction, and it was that moment that got you that conviction, wasn't it?
That's right. I mean, we did not go into Canterbury Cathedral to interrupt the service lightly. We'd been trying for 8 years to meet the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, to express our concern about his overt public support for legal discrimination against gay people. He was saying that the law should discriminate, and we thought that was very, very wrong. So as a last resort, we went into his cathedral on Easter Sunday in 1998. We didn't interrupt any of the sacred parts of the service, but when he began his sermon, myself and colleagues from the LGBT group Outrage walked calmly into the pulpit, and I simply criticised his support for legal discrimination and said, in my view, that discrimination was not a Christian value. For that, I was arrested and charged under the Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act of 1860, formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1551. And that makes any kind of protest in a church totally illegal. When it came to the trial, the judge accepted that I'd been polite and courteous, that it was peaceful, that it was brief, but he said, this law is very clear. If you interrupt a minister of religion, you are committing an offence. He could have fined me £5,000 and sent me to prison for 6 months. Instead, he gave me a fine of £18.60, his reference to the 1860 Act under which I'd been charged. But that is my only standing conviction.
It kind of, yes, one of those things, if you'd not taken place in a church, you probably would have got away with. Actually, the fact that you got the conviction probably helped the cause in a way, did it?
Well, sort of. I never one who wants to get a conviction. You know, it has very negative effects for my future plans to travel to the United States under the new draconian visa laws. But, you know, again, it's a principle. You know, if the Archbishop slams the door in our face for 8 years and refuses to meet us, then I think we were right to go and challenge him face to face. And where better than on Easter Sunday, a major event in his calendar, when the whole event was being televised. You know, that way we made sure that he was held to account. And the end result was that he dramatically reduced his advocacy of anti-gay discrimination. He also arranged for the first time for senior Anglican leaders to meet with the lesbian and gay Christian movement. And it did result in the House of Bishops of the Church of England making a very positive pro-gay equality statement.
We'll come to your inspirations in just a moment. First, the idea that outrage, as it were, it like to out people at times. The idea that newspapers can do that to celebrities, but you couldn't, that frustrated you, didn't it, a lot?
Yes,
because there was outrage at you doing that, but the newspapers would do it quite regularly to a celebrity.
And that's right. When we weren't outing them because they were gay and in the closet, it was because they were publicly anti-gay while being gay in private. So it was their hypocrisy and double standards that we were targeting. And we saw it as a form of LGBT self-defense. We were challenging those who were doing harm to gay people. They were abusing their power and influence to support anti-gay laws that had a destructive impact upon gay lives. So we felt it was morally and ethically justified. But again, it was never a first resort. It was a last resort when people refused to listen to compassion, refused to show reason and understanding.
Do you think there are still public figureheads within the UK today who are doing that, or have we moved on now? Do people realise that they can't get away with that?
I think for the most part people realise that they can't get away with it, and I'd be hard-pressed to find any public official that I'm aware of who is anti-gay in public and gay in private. Probably there are some, but I'm not aware of them.
Okay. Sylvia Pankhurst, one of your ideas for London was to have a memorial way for her. Is she one of your inspirations, the suffragette?
Yeah, I'd say my inspirations are probably people like Mohandas Gandhi, Sylvia Pankhurst, Martin Luther King, and to some extent Malcolm X and Rosa Luxemburg. What I've done is I've listened to their ideas and methods, I've learned from them, I've adapted them to the contemporary struggle for human rights, and of course I've invented a few of my own, like outing homophobes and hypocrites.
And then your motto, I think we may have touched on it right at the very start, but am I right in thinking, is it linked to love? Is it about love?
No, well, I've got several mottos,
okay.
but the one I'll leave you with is don't accept the world as it is, dream of what the world could be, and then help make it happen.
Right, and that is something which drives you personally now, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I may be right, I may be wrong, but I follow my conscience. And when I make mistakes or when I do things that break the law, I'm prepared to take the consequences. You know, I believe in it that strongly. I'm not saying I should be able to get away with doing things that are unlawful. I'm prepared to take the penalty. And that is in a long, long, long tradition of human rights advocates throughout decades in history.
Do you regret anything, any of the things that you've done?
I only regret that I didn't do more. And my constant frustration is that I've never had really proper funding for staff and for the campaigns. And that has been incredibly frustrating. You know, over the years, there've been so many what I think are quite good ideas, even very effective ideas, that I haven't been able to actualise because I just haven't had the funding. So that's been a big, big frustration.
Okay, it almost sounds there like you're looking at potentially winding down, but I've read in the past that that's not your plan. You plan to continue for as long as you can?
Yeah, I'm coming up to nearly 50 years of human rights activism. I reckon I've probably got another 20 or maybe even 30 years if I'm lucky in me. So I intend to, like the Duracell rabbit, go on and on and on. And there's plenty of causes to champion that still need profiling and protesting to secure justice. And I've been incredibly honoured to work with so many wonderful other people who've helped and supported me. It's never been a one-man show. It's always been with others, either in the foreground or the background, who've helped me along the way.
Yeah, where are the big unfinished projects and unfinished business then for you when it comes to human rights? Obviously we hear about things going on in Africa at times, and obviously when it comes to Russia and LGBT rights, but for you personally, what's the unfinished business?
Well, of course, here in Britain we have same-sex marriage, but it's not equal marriage. We've now got segregation, legal segregation in marriage law. There is the 1949 Marriage Act, which is for opposite-sex couples only, and then there's the 2013 Marriage Act, which is for same-sex couples only. Separate is not equal. Plus there's discrimination in pension inheritance. If a person in a same-sex marriage has the misfortune of their partner dying, they won't be able to inherit the full value of their partner's pension compared to if they're in a heterosexual marriage. And that strikes me as very mean and unfair. We also have the fact that sex and relationship education in schools is not mandatory, and it's not LGBTI inclusive. So lots of young gay kids don't get information they need for their health and welfare. And lots of straight kids don't get it either. So I want better sex and relationship education for every child, and also equality and diversity lessons in schools to tackle bullying and hate crime, not just against LGBT people, but on grounds of race or gender, disability, refugees. We need to create a culture in our schools where bigotry is challenged, because no child is born bigoted. Kids become bigoted because of the bad influences of adults and other kids around them. Education can help counteract that. And when it comes to the global picture, where to start? I mean, nearly 80 countries still criminalise same-sex relations in all circumstances, with some of them having penalties up to life imprisonment and even execution. The death penalty for same-sex love in the 21st century. It's unbelievable. And more than half of these countries are members of the Commonwealth. 80% of Commonwealth countries still criminalise same-sex relations. 7 of them have life imprisonment. 2 of them, in parts of the country, Pakistan and Nigeria, have the death penalty. I mean, there is so much work yet to be done, and there are so many other issues. Just in recent weeks, there have been bloggers, atheist or humanist bloggers who have been murdered in countries like Bangladesh. And how can this be happening in the 21st century? We're supposed to respect freedom of expression, and yet extremists are allowed to run amok and do these terrible, terrible things.
Do you think we will ever get to a situation where life is equal and everybody has the rights that they deserve? Or do you think we will always live in a society where actually there are injustice and injustices?
I grew up in the 1960s, so I am an unreconstructed 1960s idealist and optimist. I really do believe that the world will eventually, a long time in the future, but eventually reach a place where things like racism and homophobia, misogyny and so on are in the past, that they're history. And that's the way I want it to be. I want to live in a world where prejudice is history, where every human being is valued, respected and loved.
Okay, Peter, on that note, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. That is all we have time for on our headline interview. If you want to see the whole interview again, just head to our website. It is londonlive.co.uk. We will be back at 12 with the latest news headlines for the capital.